Also found with the so-called ghost gun, that is a firearm that may have been made with a 3D printer. It's where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. With me at the table, former top official at the Department of Justice, MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissman. Also joining us, former assistant director for counterintelligence at the FBI, senior MSNBC national security and intel analyst Frank Figliuzzi's back. We're going to start with my colleague, NBC News correspondent Sam Brock. He's outside the hotel where the shooting took place. Sam, what's the latest?
Sure. So this all seemed to resolve, or at least the person of interest, Nicolle, a long way from Midtown Manhattan, about a 4.5-hour drive from here to Altoona. Let's start with the top line right now, Nicolle, which is after roughly 5.5 days of a manhunt and images saturating everyone's TVs and social media channels. It was a McDonald's employee in Altoona at about 9:15 this morning that detected suspicious activity and recognized that face and called police, and they then responded, questioned the individual at hand, and after some questioning found out, as you said, that he had a fake ID that exactly matched the same name on a fake ID that was presented to that hostel on the Upper West Side on November 24th. So that's part A. Part B, the firearm. Nicolle, the NYPD here had spent hours and hours, days, searching for the firearm, knowing how paramount it was, the ballistics testing and how it could be connected to the person of interest in this case, had combed through large portions of Central Park, did not find the firearm. But earlier today, we found out that this individual, the person of interest, did have a firearm that matched the description of the one that was used in the murder, which, according to police today, we later found out was a ghost gun likely made or potentially made from a 3D printer. All of that lines up. Here is another sort of very difficult part of all this to comprehend as we're learning more about Mangione and his family. We've learned, Nicolle, he's got a large one. It's prominent. Huge political and real estate footprint in the Baltimore area. He has 2 siblings. He has dozens upon dozens of cousins and uncles. They own multiple country clubs. His uncle, or excuse me, his cousin, is a member of the Maryland legislature. He is a state delegate. The chief of staff for Nico Mangione said that is his cousin. We are going to be coming out with a statement later today. So he has all these family members, this massive presence, and it was a random stranger that pointed out to police that this might be their person. Again, Mangione has not been charged with anything. We are also learning much more about his background as well, Nicolle, just to dip into that slightly. Gilman School, which is an all-boys school in Baltimore, did issue a note to graduates, to its community today, saying that the person that was arrested and really wanted for questioning in connection with what happened with the Midtown murder was an alumnus of our school, and our hearts go out to everybody that was affected. On LinkedIn, Mangione says that he was, in fact, a valedictorian of that school. His fraternity at the University of Pennsylvania confirms he did attend Penn from 2017 to 2020 and was a member of their fraternity there. According to the University of Pennsylvania, someone by the name of Luigi Mangione did receive their master's in engineering at Penn. He has connections to Stanford as well. Stanford confirming that someone with that very same name was a head counselor in pre-collegiate studies. So Penn, Stanford, valedictorian potentially at his high school. This seemed like a really well-educated guy with a prominent family, with a huge footprint in Baltimore. And here we are now, almost 6 days into this manhunt, and police have said it. It was the incredible work that they did, combing through hundreds upon hundreds of video surveillance systems and using drones and trying to effort the channels of reaching the public through whatever means possible to get those images out. They're coming out with batches of images, but the most clear picture certainly was the one from the hostel with his mask pulled down, according to police, because the person of interest in this case was flirting with the person at the desk. So we now wait to find out whether or not this is going to change in terms of the designation from person of interest to anything else. But that questioning, you would have to imagine right now, Nicolle, continues as we learn more and more information.
Sam, do you know logistically when or if the NYPD will be in front of him, or if they're in front of him right now, or if he's still being questioned by Pennsylvania authorities?
Our understanding was about an hour or so ago, NYPD detectives, and my timing could be slightly off, maybe it's a little bit longer than that, arrived on scene and were going to be assisting in that investigation, Nicolle. So you'd have to imagine that that is ongoing. And then the Blair County government there says that they should be updating us on whether or not there's going to be any charges about a weapon, for example, possession of a weapon that could be dealt with before any other charges would be forthcoming. So there is going to be an order of operations here, but our understanding is detectives were on the ground about 2 hours ago, hour and a half, something like that.
Frank Figluzzi, I mean, what I want to ask you, well, I'll just ask you, WTF? I mean, is this the kind of person that, if this is the person that they're looking for, who is on the surveillance video shooting the CEO in the back, turns out to be the person of interest in Altoona, Pennsylvania? Tell me what the profile that Sam Brock just detailed in his incredible reporting says to you.
Well, you're right to ask, because even NYPD has said in response to a press conference question, this guy was not on our radar screen. Why was he not on the radar screen? Because as they were combing through corporate security files on people who threatened the company, people who maybe had claims rejected, frequent flyers with regard to threats, he's not coming up, at least not yet. They'll have to go back and comb through this. So we have a very bright young man with what would have been a very bright future, according to all that's been reported. But I zero in on his social media posts and also the books he's read. He's a voracious reader. And I want to caution everyone as I say this, we can't verify veracity of what people post on social media, but some of these facts are indeed coming together. So, for example, lots of posts on his X account about existential future of human society, the impact of technology on the human brain, the morality and ethics of murder, and whether it's ever appropriate or not. And then go over to his Goodreads account, which you'll see he's a voracious reader. Books he's read this year include Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. And he concludes after reading Kaczynski's writings that, yes, there are circumstances where it's okay to kill someone, and typically around the issue of money and corporate greed. So we're beginning to get a picture of someone who may not have ever been denied an probably not hurting for insurance coverage. So what we've got here is perhaps in his own mind an activist killer. And the question arises, was he on his way to kill again? Why did he keep that gun? Was he really interested in fleeing or getting caught? Why does he have his so-called manifesto in his backpack? What was he ready for? Where was he going? Had he simply given up or wanted to get caught? And if he's an activist, he'll be talking. Unlikely that he'll shut up because he'll want to say why he did this.
We are now going to bring into our conversation my colleague, NBC News national law enforcement and intelligence correspondent Tom Winter. Tom, Sam started off with some extraordinary reporting about who the individual arrested in Altoona is. I mean, Luigi Mangione doesn't sound like anyone that I've ever covered sitting in this chair as a suspect in a crime like this. I wonder if you can answer whether this is unique from your experience, Perch. And I know you have some more reporting on what Frank Figluzzi's talking about. Jump in.
Well, sure. I mean, there's a whole host of things that they're looking at. They're looking at an online post, investigators are, to see whether or not it's in fact linked back to this individual, whether it's relevant in the investigation. But it has a lot to do. It has a lot to do with information about Ted Kaczynski, believe it or not, Nicolle. So his ideology is unique, to put it mildly. And this individual, I think there's going to be, we'll look and see what the legal process is going to do here in the next 12 to 24 hours. And in fact, if they are the suspect. But there's an awful lot of information already and evidence that members of law enforcement have gathered that appears to draw closer and closer to this being the individual. I just think it's remarkable that an employee at a McDonald's had the wherewithal to look up, see this person, and call their local police today. It's kind of a case study, or a textbook example, I should say, of exactly what to do in these situations. So just an incredible day. And once the NYPD in the DA's office are able to look at all the evidence and kind of make sure it matches what they've been told, they arrived there a little after 3:15 Eastern time today. They'll be able at that point to what we refer to as dropping papers on somebody, so be able to bring some charges. So that's where this case is at this point.
Tom Winter, the employee at McDonald's, is the example of something that went right. I mean, how did a person who was in a fraternity with members of his family in elected government not look up at what was, I mean, you described it as one of the most brazen assassinations in the streets of New York City in decades. I mean, how did everyone, I mean, why did the employee at McDonald's see him before any of his family or friends did?
Oh, boy, that's going to be a big question, Nicolle. And reporters, you can bet, are gathering around the houses of the relevant parties that are involved here to ask those questions. And certainly, I would think that if it was my a relative or a friend of mine, that I would be able to point that person out. They do have two pictures in the clear. This is from the taxi that he used to get up to the George Washington Bridge, according to the NYPD, this person of interest. So we're just going to have to see where all that goes. There'll be a lot of reporting that'll be done in the next couple of days. I'm not probably in the same league as Frank on this and many other issues, but just as far as in terms of charging somebody for not reporting to the FBI, but I think that is, or the Justice Department, but I think that's something that's well down the road before we have that discussion.
Andrew Weissman, your thoughts on all of it?
Well, this reminds me of the FBI when things break, the one thing you know is that you don't know the whole story yet. That's like for sure. There's no question this is a tragedy, and the issue is sort of like what to make of this beyond that. I immediately start thinking, given the age and what we've just heard about mental health issues, that may not be an issue. I'm just saying that's where I'm thinking about it, especially when you have, as Frank said, odd behavior afterwards, and odd behavior beforehand, like going to the Starbucks and sort of being careful and also not being careful, and then having all of this information, all of this incriminating evidence, assuming this is the person, which is clearly what the police are intimating, that he didn't dispose of it. And that suggests some either wanting to get caught and or some mental health issues. But I think the sort of follow-up thought I had was the one you had with respect to the family members and friends. It's, you know, given how that this person was not that careful, it's great that he's caught, but where was the NYPD? I mean, this took quite a long time when, you know, we're sitting here at a studio that is blocks from where this happened. And the idea that it took, you know, 5 days to find him when the person was not being that careful. I mean, the first thought.
Or running very far. I mean, you could get halfway around the world in 6 days.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the information that he had his passport with him, and then you were thinking, okay, how did this person not get caught sooner? When you know, the idea, the sort of broad speculation was, is this somebody who is like a professional hitman? And then you hear details that are like, well, of course not, because of all sorts of aspects of how sort of sloppily this was done. And it sort of makes you realize this was sort of old-fashioned detective work in some ways, which is there was a wanted poster and somebody very clever and smart, you know, and also a good citizen called it in. But I think it sort of remains to be seen on the big picture. What do you make of this? Is this something that's inspired by people who think that you can take the law into their own hands, people who resort to violence without it being condemned in a larger perspective? And there's this sort of, we're in a political climate, but we don't know if that's really going to be representative of this case. It could be a much more individual story. I sort of end with, it is a tragedy on a human scale. I think the reaction of some, not many, but some that view this as not a tragedy is, to me, the one take home that I think all of us can have, which is that we're living in a time where there isn't a consensus when something like this happens, that